In the year 1893, among the forgotten archives of an abandoned monastery in southern France, a peculiar letter was found. Written in archaic Latin and bearing visible burn marks, the document mentioned a refuge beneath the cross and referenced an underground location accessible only to the eyes of the true clergy. For decades, scholars considered the letter a hoax or a medieval exaggeration until 1978, when a team of archaeologists mysteriously disappeared during a private excavation in the interior of Tuscany. Since then, fragments of information have surfaced like disjointed pieces of a puzzle buried for centuries. Various clues scattered through coded documents, altered paintings, and lost maps seem to point to a hidden sacred structure, a temple not registered by any official institution, connected to ceremonies never recognized by the Church. With the indirect involvement of extinct orders and the omission of powerful figures, this place remains cloaked in time and denial. But after all, what kind of sanctuary would the Church have an interest in hiding for over 500 years? Welcome to another night where mysteries never sleep. I am Midnight, and this is 7 Nights. Before we begin, I'd like to ask for your help. Like the video, comment, and subscribe to the channel. It's just a click, but it makes a huge difference for YouTube to recommend the videos to more people and for me to keep bringing this content to you. I'm counting on you. Let's dive into the video. Have you ever heard of a letter hidden for almost 400 years within the walls of a French monastery? Well, it exists. In 1893, during a restoration at the ancient monastery of Saint Raphael in southern France, a restorer discovered a stone compartment behind the library. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, was a parchment sealed with dark wax. The seal bore a papal coat of arms, but with a detail that no one has been able to explain to this day. That coat of arms does not belong to any pope officially recorded in the history of the Church. The letter was written in Old Latin, but it wasn't a simple correspondence. It was a warning. Terms like refugium sub cruce, refuge beneath the cross, appeared several times, alongside even more enigmatic phrases such as the unspoken word rests beneath the stone altar. These were not poetic metaphors. It was the description of a real place, underground, protected by members of the clergy, and according to the text, hidden for centuries, not from the people, but from the Church itself. The document went unnoticed for decades, until in 1994 it was submitted to carbon-14 analysis. The dating matched exactly with the period when the Protestant Reformation began to fracture the foundations of the Church. That alone would already be interesting. But the most disturbing part came when scholars tried to identify the letter's author, a man named Dom Carolus Benedicti. He was never found in ecclesiastical records. No biography, no mention in the Vatican archives. Yet such an unusual name does not disappear easily. In an almost forgotten diary of Cardinal Lorenzo Pucci, written in 1530, there is a short note that reads, "Brother Carolus, guardian of the deep silence, insists on the risk of profanation." Guardian of silence? That expression does not exist among the ecclesiastical titles of the time. This suggests that Benedicti was not a common member. He was part of something that operated outside the records, and within the Church. The letter describes a temple hidden beneath a sacred structure. It doesn't say where, but mentions twisted columns, a spiral staircase, and inscriptions that must not be read by impure eyes. The center of the structure, according to the text, guards an object that must never be named. Why would someone write that? And why, if the contents were so dangerous, wasn't the letter simply destroyed? This is where the story takes an even darker turn. The papal seal used on the letter, the one that doesn't match any official coat of arms, resembles a symbol found on seals of an extinct monastic fraternity, the Fraternitas Sileni, or Fraternity of Silence. Little is known about it. The few surviving records indicate that its members had a single function, to guard that which even the Church could not deny, but also could not allow to be known. These monks did not preach, did not leave writings, did not appear in ceremonies. They were sent to protect places and manuscripts that carried a forbidden theological weight. One of these places, according to the letter, was the temple beneath the symbol of the cross. If this fraternity really existed, and the evidence suggests it did, it would have been responsible for keeping this sanctuary in total anonymity. Now think with me, if something like this were a fabrication, why use such precise language? Why hide the seal in an inaccessible location? And why cross-reference it with a real historical figure like Cardinal Pucci? These details don't feel like part of a hoax. They indicate that the letter is authentic and was written by someone who feared the revelation of what was hidden. What's most curious is the Vatican's silence after the discovery. No official note, no denial. And here comes a point that always intrigues me. When something is fake, the Church usually responds quickly. When it doesn't, it either doesn't know how to respond, or it knows exactly what it's trying to avoid. A final passage in the letter reads, "If it falls into the wrong hands, the truth will become noise, and the noise will destroy the word." It's a powerful phrase. It speaks not only of faith, it speaks of language, of knowledge, of something that, if revealed, could reverse centuries of doctrine and topple the foundations that uphold the Christian faith. But there was more. Next to the letter, a piece of leather was found with a charcoal drawing. What appeared to be a floor plan showed a circular room with spiral columns. At the center, a hooded figure held what seemed to be a reliquary or a box. This drawing reinforces that the described temple was not symbolic. It had architectural structure, a defined purpose. After that, the letter was exhibited only once in public, in a restricted exhibition in Switzerland. Soon after, it disappeared. Today, it is speculated to be in the possession of a private collector with ties to Italian esoteric orders. Coincidence? Or part of a tradition of keeping certain knowledge away from public eyes? And even with all this information, no ecclesiastical authority has spoken out. No investigation was opened. No answer was given. The silence, in this case, says much more than any justification. But it was in this silence that another clue emerged. Not in secret archives, not in rare manuscripts, but in the heart of one of the most emblematic cathedrals of the Iberian Peninsula. A place that receives thousands of worshippers every year, without anyone realizing what lies just beneath their feet. Now listen closely. Imagine you're inside one of the largest cathedrals in Europe, surrounded by ancient stained glass and the echo of liturgical chants, and there, behind an ordinary tapestry, you find a map. Not a common map, but a detailed drawing of something that was never meant to be there. That's exactly what happened in 1964, during a restoration in the Cathedral of Toledo, Spain. No one expected anything unusual, but all it took was pulling back a time-worn tapestry to reveal a stone panel with a carefully sealed opening. Inside was an old wooden box. Nothing about it seemed extraordinary until the restorers opened it. Inside, wrapped in a cloth embroidered with ancient liturgical symbols, was a parchment. It was a map, but it showed no known territory. The title, in archaic Latin, left little room for interpretation. Infernus Sacratus, something like the Sacred Inferno. A name like that, hidden in a cathedral? That alone would be reason enough to stop everything. The most disturbing part was what the map depicted. A spiral staircase descending through several underground levels, leading to a circular chamber with 7 columns. At its center, the same symbol from the Avignon letter, that cross with curved arms that belongs to no known liturgical tradition. It was the second time this symbol had appeared. First in a letter that should never have survived the 16th century. Now, in a map hidden in one of Spain's most visited cathedrals. Coincidence? On-site analysis indicated that the map dated to around 1542, based on the ink used. That places it in the same period as the earlier letter. In other words, everything suggests this document was drawn by someone who knew deeply what they were depicting. And more, someone who had access to this place. The pressing question is, why hide it inside a still active cathedral? Toledo is an ancient city, built in layers. The cathedral was erected on old Visigothic and Muslim foundations. There are records of tunnels, chambers, and sealed crypts dating back to the 13th century. But this blueprint doesn't resemble any traditional liturgical structure. And even if it were just a symbolic representation, why use such heavy terminology? Sacred Inferno is not something you accidentally write inside a Christian temple. You might be wondering, has anyone tried to explore the cathedral's underground? The answer is yes, but not as you'd expect. In the 1970s, ground sensors were installed to map potential leaks and improve crypt ventilation. The results showed undocumented underground cavities, some very deep. Yet instead of investigating, the report was shelved. Officially, they claimed it was due to natural formations. But since when does the church shelve excavations because of rocks? The map was never released to the public. It was shown only once, in 1982, during a closed conference for specialists. One of the attendees, Spanish historian Javier Malagon, noted in his diary that the symbols around the main chamber resembled Gnostic inscriptions, the kind of knowledge hunted down and destroyed by the early church. And what if this place wasn't built by the church, but absorbed by it? What if it holds rituals that predate Christianity itself? The idea may seem far-fetched, but it wouldn't be the first time an ancient cult was swallowed by a dominant faith. This happened with pagan rituals turned into Christian festivals, with symbols assimilated for theological convenience. What sets this case apart is the clear attempt to erase its existence entirely. There was no repurposing here, there was concealment. And the most intriguing part lies in a note written on the back of the map. A short phrase in Old Spanish: "Those who know how to see will find the truth. The rest will see only stone." That sounds like a warning, or perhaps a key to deciphering something greater. And that raises another question. What exactly needs to be seen? Are we talking about a physical entrance, a visual code, or something symbolic that only the initiated could interpret? The most accepted theory among those who study these documents is that the temple described in the map does, in fact, exist and lies beneath the Cathedral of Toledo. But knowing that is not enough. The structure seems to be protected not only by stone, but by layers of silence and forgetting. A secret like that doesn't remain hidden by accident. Someone wants it to never come to light. And the most unsettling part, if the Avignon letter was truly written to warn about a place like this, the map proves it wasn't wrong. Everything aligns. The timing, the symbols, the architectural details. The sanctuary is not a legend. It has an address. And if this map survived hidden for 400 years, it's because it still serves a purpose. The problem is, if it points to a path, is someone still using that path? And for what? During the 17th century, confidential reports circulated among scholars and clergymen about rites that were never officially recognized by the church. Rites performed far from the eyes of the faithful, carried out in underground spaces, almost always protected by oaths of silence and symbols that belonged to no known doctrinal current. When these accounts began to be compared with the descriptions of the temple found in the letter and the map, a pattern began to emerge, and it was disturbing. Many of these testimonies came from forgotten archives, reports from inquisitors who mentioned sanctuaries of veiled practice, where the name of Christ was invoked in different tones, where sacrifice was not merely symbolic. In one account, dated 1611, a Spanish friar describes being taken to a circle of living stone, where chants were spoken backwards. This practice is also mentioned in dissident Gnostic rituals, a way of inverting official liturgy, not out of blasphemy, but through hidden reinterpretation. The temple cited in the Avignon letter and drawn on the Toledo map appears to have been used precisely for this type of ceremony. The circular layout, with 7 columns and a central chamber, resembles ancient ritualistic spaces used for initiation, invocation, and worship, but not in the name of the traditional church. And this is where the theory becomes even more delicate, because what's at stake is not just a hidden location. It is a type of cult that survived in silence within the Catholic structure. Scholars of marginal theology, the kind never accepted by the councils, point out that the number 7, the columns, and the spiral staircase have origins in Kabbalah, Hermeticism, and even Egyptian traditions. Some of these elements were later adapted by orders like the Templars, and later still by European secret societies. The problem is, this kind of structure should never be connected to a Christian cathedral. But it is. Moreover, there are scattered mentions of a reversal ritual, where sacred texts would be recited in reverse order, and elements of Genesis reinterpreted through the lens of a dark messianic figure. One of the oldest apocryphal texts, the Gospel of Judas, presents a similar version, a savior who leads to liberation through forbidden knowledge. Could this temple be a reflection of that belief? A space created to worship not the revealed God, but the hidden one? In 1957, an Italian historian named Giulio Castellani published a little-known article titled "The Closed Chambers of the Clergy." In it, Castellani presents fragments of letters between 16th-century bishops discussing the need to preserve a center of non-public practices for cases of spiritual urgency. The text is vague, but suggests there was a consensus among certain members of the ecclesiastical elite about maintaining alternative rites for select eyes in specific situations. This kind of practice wasn't exactly heresy, but it wasn't orthodoxy either. It was something else, a parallel form of faith, a structure of spiritual power on the margins of liturgy, something that, if revealed, would destabilize the entire narrative of official sanctity. Perhaps that's why the temple was so zealously hidden, not out of fear of the people, but fear of what it represents. Some records mention the use of black candles, ointments, and symbols of transmutation during these rituals. There is no description of human sacrifice, and that must be made clear, but there are accounts of the use of animal blood, chants in dead languages, and long vigils within the central chamber. This aligns with the practices of initiatic orders that sought contact with angelic entities, or something beyond. The most unsettling part is that none of these practices were formally condemned in public. They were simply never mentioned, as if the strategy was not to combat them, but to silence them, to keep everything in the background, underground, literally. And that is exactly where the temple lies. Beneath, out of sight, out of narrative. There is speculation that these ceremonies involved a specific object. The letter mentions an unnamed element at the center of the chamber. The map marks this spot as the focal point of the space. What could this object be? A book? A relic? A set of bones? Or something symbolic, understandable only to participants? No document describes it openly, perhaps out of fear, or out of loyalty. The similarities to ancient, pre-Christian rituals are so evident that it's hard to believe this temple was built for any other purpose. It wasn't adapted. It was constructed like this from the beginning. The layout, the shape of the staircase, the arrangement of the columns, everything points to structures that existed before Christianity was made the religion of the empire. And if this place has been maintained for over 5 centuries, how do we explain the absolute silence surrounding it? Who authorized access? Who took part in the rituals? And most importantly, do these practices still happen? Because if the temple is still standing, and all indications say it is, it's almost certain it hasn't remained empty all this time. And this leads us to another clue, a silent and mysterious order, mentioned only in internal records, and which appears to be directly linked to the sanctuary's protection. In internal church documents dating back to the 16th century, there are recurring references to a group called Ordo Mutorum, the Order of the Mute Monks. Never canonized, never publicly recognized, and yet cited in administrative records, almost always linked to the security of ecclesiastical archives and properties. They did not take ordinary vows. They took the vow of perpetual silence. And not just in a symbolic sense. None of them spoke. Ever. The first clear mention appears in 1554, in a report from the Vatican's secret archive. The text lists those responsible for guarding a location classified only as Domus Infraterram, the house beneath the earth. And there is the name of the order. No description, no location, no explanation. Only, under the custody of the Mutorum. Who were they? Why this absolute vow of silence? And what were they guarding so rigorously? This kind of order is uncommon, even among the oldest monastic traditions. The vow of silence, when it exists, is temporary, symbolic, or partial. But these monks not only lived in complete silence, they also left no written records. Their movements were made in small, discreet groups, always at night, according to rare testimonies from servants in remote convents. And in each documented case, they were associated with underground structures or unusual crypts. In 1623, a Spanish inquisitor named Hernán de Cuellar wrote a confidential report to the Tribunal of the Holy Office. He claimed to have encountered one of these monks, alone, inside a crypt near Burgos. The man was kneeling, eyes closed, with his hands crossed over his chest. He answered no questions, did not move for hours, until he was forcibly removed. Not a single word. Only a medallion around his neck bearing the now familiar symbol, the cross with curved arms. This account might not have much value, if not for one detail. The location where the monk was found corresponds, in part, to the dimensions described in the Avignon letter. Spiral staircases, twisted columns, and a central chamber. Cuellar, clearly disturbed, ends the text with a chilling sentence. There, where the word is buried, silence takes the form of flesh. What exactly did he mean by that? There are no records that this order was officially dissolved. Unlike the Templars or the Reformed Benedictines, the mute monks simply disappeared from the records around 1702. That alone is strange. Religious orders, even extinct ones, usually leave traces, buildings, coats of arms, libraries. Here, nothing remains. Only scattered citations, almost always accompanied by words like guardians, obscurity, or ritual domain. Some independent researchers believe the order was created for a single purpose: to guard the underground temple. Not as priests, but as sentinels. They did not celebrate the faith, they protected the secret. And silence was not just discipline, it was a key, a language, a way to ensure that knowledge would not be lost through poorly spoken words. It's possible this model was based on much older traditions, predating Christianity. Mystery cults from the Hellenic world, for example, also had castes of silent guardians. In Eleusis, in the ancient Greek world, there were priests who never uttered the names of the gods they protected. Could it be that the Church absorbed this concept, adapting it to its own forbidden sanctuary? Another interesting piece of evidence comes from an obscure book called Liber Custodum, discovered in the Palermo Library in 1926. The text describes secret practices of an anonymous order of monks, never directly named, who used the language of gesture to communicate. A system of signs supposedly used to transmit ritual instructions without breaking the vow of silence. Some of these signs resemble those found in faded frescoes in the Cathedral of Toledo itself. This kind of detail is what's most striking, because it's not just theory. We're talking about gestures, inscriptions, body positions, physical, verifiable elements. This isn't loose esoteric symbolism. It's structured practice, repeated, and used for something that required absolute secrecy. The question is, what was so sacred or so dangerous that it needed to be protected by an order of men who would never speak of it? In a letter archived in Coimbra, Portugal, a Jesuit priest mentions receiving, in 1681, a visit from two speechless monks who requested access to the crypt of an old convent. They presented a silver-engraved symbol as identification and said not a single word during the visit. According to him, both disappeared the next day without a trace. These men were ghosts within the church itself, present yet ignored, active yet unacknowledged. And the most impressive part is that the only places they appear are always connected to the things no one wants to discuss: the buried temple, the unrecognized rituals, the legacy that history tried to silence. But if this order existed, and if it survived in secret for so long, it's fair to ask, are they still among us? Do they still guard the temple? Or has someone taken their place? Because the sanctuary may still be there, intact. And where something is hidden, there is always someone ensuring it stays that way. Few people outside academic circles know the name Abbot Petruccio. Officially, he was just another Italian monastic leader of the 16th century, active between 1562 and 1597 in the region of Syracuse, Sicily. But what few know, and almost no one speaks about, is that this man left behind a set of manuscripts that were deliberately erased from history. Not burned, not destroyed, hidden. And when fragments of these texts came to light, they revealed a doctrine the Church could never accept. These manuscripts became known as the Codex Petruccio. The name is almost folkloric, because the original was never published. But parts of it emerged over the centuries, mentioned in catalogs of vanished libraries, cited by forbidden theologians, and finally rediscovered in 1938 by a German professor, Friedrich Gotz, during a visit to an abandoned convent in Palermo. The content he found there was partially illegible, but what could be translated was enough to leave the academic community in stunned silence. What Petruccio proposed was not common heresy. He spoke of a hidden layer of Christian revelation, a parallel theology centered not on the figure of the glorified Christ, but on something he called the Christ of the abyss. A dark, silent, hidden archetype, acting behind the scenes of faith, guiding only those capable of bearing the unrevealed truth. This was not metaphor, it was doctrine. And here we reach an extremely delicate point. According to the texts, this shadowy Christ does not manifest in churches or sacraments, but in closed spaces, underground, where the absence of light serves as preparation for direct contact with the primordial divine essence. Petruccio did not deny the Bible, but claimed that the public Gospels were merely the surface. The true word was hidden underground, both literally and spiritually. One of the most disturbing passages of the manuscript describes an initiation rite in 7 phases, performed at the root of the altar, where the ceiling is stone and the floor is flesh. The language is symbolic, but the context suggests he is referring to a physical space, a temple. The description matches the elements of the sanctuary indicated on the map from the Cathedral of Toledo. The circular chamber, the columns, the spiral staircase, all are there described in detail. What's most enigmatic is that Petruccio does not present this as a personal discovery or revelation. He writes as if he is merely recording a much older tradition, passed down by initiates through the centuries. In a marginal note, he cites the phrase, "The silence of the brothers who guard the abyss is the foundation of invisible faith." This seems to be a direct reference to the mute monks discussed in the previous chapter. Friedrich Gotz, the scholar who accessed the manuscript in 1938, attempted to publish part of the content in an academic journal. The article was blocked, the manuscript confiscated, and he lost his professorship months later, with no official explanation. To this day, the whereabouts of the original material are unknown. Some fragmented copies circulated clandestinely, but almost all have vanished. The few preserved phrases are stored in private dossiers, and most scholars avoid even mentioning the subject publicly. One of the few available excerpts describes a specific symbol to be engraved on the stone floor of the central chamber during the ritual, a circle with 3 inverted crosses in a spiral shape. This symbol, curiously, has already appeared in faded inscriptions in old chapels in both Sicily and Galicia. In every case, it was discreetly removed during renovations, as if someone knew it was never meant to be there. Petruccio also states that this knowledge was not rejected by the Church, because it was never even discussed. He writes that the Council avoids what it does not recognize and silences what it cannot control. This statement, placed in a context where the councils were increasingly closed to free theological discussion, seems a direct accusation against the dominant ecclesiastical model. And perhaps that is why his texts were buried, not just metaphorically. Could all of this be mere mystical delusion? Of course it could, but there are concrete records of the manuscript, independent testimonies describing the same excerpts, and historical traces of symbols and phrases that have appeared in different parts of Europe. Moreover, there is a pattern. Everything involving the name Petruccio is removed, archived, or simply silenced. What's intriguing is that the content of the manuscripts is not revolutionary in the sense of trying to destroy Christian faith. On the contrary, it attempts to deepen it through paths now considered too dark. And that is even more dangerous. Because if it were a lie, it would be easy to dismiss. But if it's true, it could change everything. And what if Petruccio's Christ of the Abyss is not an alternative being, but a more ancient and profound way of interpreting the same figure? A hidden layer, which survived silently in underground chambers, protected by monks who could not speak? If these writings were indeed inspired by rituals practiced in the buried temple, then Petruccio was not a theorist, he was an initiate. And the question that remains is, how many others came after him? Everything we've discussed so far could be placed in the realm of hypotheses, theories, forgotten documents. But in 1978, something happened that involved real people, respected professionals, and that remains unexplained to this day. A group of archaeologists, funded by a European foundation with religious ties, vanished completely during an excavation in the interior of Tuscany. The exact location of the excavation was never officially disclosed, but some clues indicate they were very close, perhaps too close. The team was made up of 5 specialists, 3 Italians, 1 Frenchman, and a Spanish historian. They had been hired to investigate underground structures found on a church-owned property near Arezzo. The land had been isolated years earlier, under the justification of containing Roman ruins too fragile for public exposure. But records that later surfaced show that this excavation had another purpose. The project's name was Via Sileni. No university was officially involved, but the researchers had impeccable credentials. Documentation obtained by a local journalist reveals that the mission was to explore a sequence of tunnels that, according to ancient records, led to a circular structure buried beneath layers of stone and limestone. The design once again matched that of the temple described in the Avignon letter and the map of Toledo. The first week of excavations went smoothly. Preliminary reports mentioned the discovery of medieval-style columns that did not correspond to the expected Roman period. Carved wooden fragments and inscriptions in deformed Latin were also found. One of them, partially deciphered, read, "He who enters unbidden shall meet the original knight." It sounds symbolic, but also like a warning. On the 8th day, communication ceased. The last radio transmission said only, "We've reached the second chamber. There is something here." After that, total silence. No transmission, no signal. When the support team arrived at the site 2 days later, they found the equipment abandoned, with no signs of struggle, violence, or a hurried exit. Only a trail of ropes led to the entrance of the tunnel and ended at an unfinished staircase descending into darkness. Local authorities were called, but little was released to the press. The Vatican sent 2 representatives to monitor the situation. Notably, the land belonged to a diocese but was registered under a civilian name. Later documents revealed that the site had been classified as special liturgical property, a rare category used only in extremely specific situations, usually involving ancient burials or places of non-public worship. Days later, a single item was found, the Spanish historian's diary, partially burned. The final pages were nearly illegible, but one sentence was highlighted by experts. The temple breathes. It is not empty. No bodies were located. No official explanation was given. The families were instructed not to comment on the case, under the justification of risk to cultural heritage security. Years later, the case became legend among European archaeologists and historians. Many believe the disappearances were covered up by higher authorities. Others think the professionals faked their own disappearance as part of some radical movement. But all analyzed documents point to something much more serious. They were following a theological trail. And that trail ended exactly where the ancient text said it would. It's impossible to ignore the pattern. The letter, the map, the accounts of the temple, Petruccio's manuscripts, and now, a modern team, equipped with technology and expertise, disappearing precisely at the point where all the evidence converges. This isn't just coincidence. It's consequence. They reached where no one was meant to go. To this day, the site remains closed, surrounded by high walls and private security. There are no signs, no indications. Just silence. No further excavations were permitted. No new teams were sent. Whatever they found in there wasn't just sealed off. It was locked away. And if the temple is still there, if the rituals are still being performed in secret, away from the eyes of the world, and if the guardians of silence never cease to exist, only change their name or their robes, the disappearance of the archaeologists is not the end of this story. It's the clearest warning that something lies below, something ancient, protected, and perhaps never meant to be found. What began with a forgotten letter at the bottom of a French monastery turned into a trail that crosses centuries, cathedrals, silent orders, and manuscripts erased from history. Each piece, on its own, could be dismissed. But together, they outline something much deeper, a structure that survived not in plain sight, but beneath the feet of an entire civilization. A hidden temple, protected by monks who never spoke, visited by rituals never recognized, and forgotten by design, not by accident. This story is just one piece, and one day perhaps you'll see the whole puzzle. If this made you think, subscribe, like the video. It helps the channel grow. Don't forget to share, because more voices mean more discoveries.